ज्ञानतिमिरन्दस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चाक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नामश्रेष्ठं मनुमाति सिद्धिपुत्रं मत्रास्वरूपं रूपं तस्याग्रजमुरुपुरीं मथुरीं रक्षावतीं राधाकुन्दं गिरिवरं महो राधिकमधापुषं प्राप्तो यस्य प्रतितकृपाया श्रीगुरुं तं नतोऽस्मि। वंशकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्यैव च पतितानं पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। निखिलाश्रुतिमौलिरत्नमालयति निराजितपदपङ्कजन्त आजिमुक्तकुलैरुपश्यामनं परितस्त्वं हरिणं संश्रयामि। नार्पितचरिं चिरकरुणयावतीर्णा खलु क्षमार्पयितुमुन्नतज्वलराशं स्वभक्तीश्वरम्। हरे पुरतसुन्दराद्यतिकदम्बसन्दीपिता सदा हृदये कन्दरे स्फुरतो वासठिनन्दना। अजानुलम्बिता भुजो कनकावदातो संकीर्तनैकपितरो कमलायतक्षं विश्वम्भरो द्वियावरो जुगद्धर्मपालो वन्दे जगत्प्रियकरो करुणावतारो। लादिनी शक्तिस्वरूपाय गौरङ्गासुहृदाय च भक्तशक्तिप्रदनाय गदाधर नमस्तुते। हे कृष्णा करुणा सिन्धु दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपीककान्त राधाकान्त नमस्तुते। राधे वृन्दावनाधीशे करुणामृतवाहिनी कृपया निजपादब्जा दर्शनमयं प्रदीयतम्। भक्त्या विहीनाय अपराधलक्षाय चित्तश्चाकमादितरङ्गमाध्ये कृपमयि त्वां शरणं प्रपन्नं वृन्दे नमस्ते चरणारविन्दम्। वृन्दे नमस्ते चरणारविन्दम्। श्रीला गुरुदेव की जय, श्रीमन महाप्रभु की जय, श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय, श्री जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय, गौर भक्त वृंद की जय, गौर प्रमानंद हरि हरि बोल। So, pranam to all of you. Welcome. Thanks for coming again. Greetings from Sri Kshetra, Sri Jagannath Puri Dham. And we are continuing today with our weekly series of Q&A that we have begun last week. Hopefully we can make it sustainable as much as possible. That will depend at least 50% of you all, so please help me with that. Thank you for being there. So, as usual, we will receive questions, whatever topics you would like to share, to speak about. You're most welcome to do so. I'm seeing there is already one question sent by Namrasa in the chat, and I already have also 2 questions that were sent to me today in the morning by Balaram Prabhu from New Zealand. Since for them the timing is really complicated now, it's like midnight for them. He's finding difficult to attain live, so he sent me 2 questions to address. So I will begin with the first one coming from him, since that was the first one being sent. Then we can continue with Namrasa's, and then maybe the second one, or whatever other topic you may like to share as well. So let's see. So the first question sent by Balaram Prabhu is saying, I would like to ask about the place of modern psychology or modern counseling in the life of a sadhaka, and that some devotees say that why will you need counseling when we have Bhagavad Gita? Okay, so that's basically the question. And so some thoughts about that. Of course, the line of thought seems familiar. It's not the first time I'm hearing this type of proposals, basically, like, why psychology? We have Bhagavad Gita. Why this? We have that. We have Srinam. Why this? We have that, and so on. So, and there's a place for saying all those things, but in brief, of course, in just the reply to this question, we'll have to do it. All depends on each one's adhikar. As much as you walk the talk, you can say that, but the point is, you can say that maybe for you. Maybe you have the adhikar, the eligibility to just embrace the Gita and found there all psychology, all support, all knowledge, all everything, all food, all water, all pran, everything you need to maintain your life in a sustainable way. But the point is, probably not everyone else has that capacity. So we should also have the capacity of not only ascertaining our capacity, but also being expert in ascertaining the other one's capacities. That has a lot to do with becoming a madhyam, a progressive Vaishnava, which knows how to relate with each person. And of course, before knowing how to relate with each person, you have to know where each person is at. So if that's not clear and you are just, let's say, expecting the whole world to act according to your own adhikar, that may not be very sensitive from our part. And that may even speak about our own adhikar. No, because we may think we may have certain adhikar and we may expect the whole world to adjust to that. But the more we think in those terms, the more actually we may not be having that adhikar we think we have, if you will. So, of course, it all becomes evident when we have to relate with others, as we always say. It's relatively easy to, to live in a cave, if you will, and isolate from humanity and think that we are really self-controlled and we are really self-sufficient and we have reached a certain particular stage of insight. And there's this famous story of the yogi who went to the Himalayas and stayed there like for more than 20 years by himself, eating some roots and not relating with anyone. And at one point feeling, well, I think I've reached a considerable degree of yogic attainment. So he heard there was a Kumbh Mela to be done that year in Haridwar. So he thought, I will go to the Kumbh Mela. I'm enough sense control to be there, and maybe probably everyone else will also grasp my adhikar or whatever. And it is said that he went there, and of course there were millions of people suddenly. And at one point he was in the river reciting his oblation. Some other person went and stepped on his toe, on his feet, and he became really annoyed. And he said, what are you doing? Don't you know who I am? And all this stuff. And the other person, yes, he said, yes. Now I know who you are, basically. Now that you are reacting in that way, I can see where you stand on. No? So the point is basically, after 25 years in the cave, he thought something, but after 5 minutes of relating with other people, he realized something else. No? So we should be open to be put to test in community, in the context of community, because at least, especially for us Gaudiyas, our ultimate goal is not to live in a cave. Our ultimate goal is not perpetual isolation, but perfect integration of reality in communal, community terms, in the community of Golok, Golok Navadvip, Golok Vrindavan. So that's a general way of replying to the question. But of course, I will continue saying something more. The first 6 chapters of the Gita deal with the psychology of the Gita. The other 6 chapters deal with the theology and so on. So we could say there's place again for saying, yes, there is psychology in the Gita. And if you are, able to draw, to extract the substantial elements that the Gita is presenting in terms of psychology, you may not need to go to a psychologist. I'm not saying that every single person needs to have therapy, go with therapy with some psychologist or something. So it's possible, more than possible. But again, the idea of we have the Gita, why do you need that? We can also apply that same criteria in so many levels, with so many levels. We have this famous example of the devotee that was with Mahaprabhu, and the devotee was just simply looking at the cover of the Bhagavad Gita. I was crying profusely. He didn't know how to read. So he was not able to read the Gita, actually. But he was able to look at the cover. And he was crying and crying. And when Mahaprabhu asked him, why you are crying so much, people thought he's crying because he doesn't know how to read the book and because everyone is doing bullying on him. That's why he's crying. But Mahaprabhu realized, no, he's crying for something else. So he said, well, I'm looking at this cover, and when I see how Bhagavan, Master and Controller and Ishvara, Parameshvara, Supreme Personality, is driving the chariot of Arjuna, is becoming the servant of his servant, conquered by his love, I cannot contain myself. It's too much. So Mahaprabhu, of course, embraced him and started to cry with him and told him, you have really understood the Gita, even though you have not opened the first page, even though you do not know any single verse. You're able to draw the essence of the Gita just by seeing the cover. So I can say the same. As someone would say, why psychology? We have the Gita. I could say, why open the Gita? We have the cover. But many people will say, no, Maharaj, that's too, I'm not able to, I don't have that adhikar of that devotee. I need to read the Gita. Okay, no problem. So in the same way you need to open the book, some other people may need to open another books apart from the Gita. But in the context of aligning themselves with the Gita, that's the important point, of course. Here, the important point is not so much if I'm having a psychologist or not, but how much that is helping me in my devotional project. Because if we just resort to this, how to say, like very simple lines, no? We only have only the Gita is okay, or devotee saying, I don't know, Srila Prabhupada gave us everything is in Prabhupada's books, we don't need to read anyone else's books. This type of, not simple mentality, I will say, but simplistic mentality. No, it's not the same thing to be simple and to be simplistic. To be simplistic is more kind of a reductionistic mentality, where you don't want to deal with the complexity that begs for integration, as I always like to say. So if we want to progress, to be progressive Vaishnavas, we need to integrate complexity, all those things that still remain there as what Richard Rohr will call necessary suffering. Those things that you need to go through to integrate in your life to become a wholesome person. So, and then you can be simple. Then you can reach the simplicity of Braja Lila, if you will. Then you can reach the naivete of the Brajavasis, the innocence there, by first going to so much complexity that you need to harmonize as a human, as a sadhaka. If you want to avoid that, in the name of being simple, you are actually being simplistic. In the name of being essentialist, you are actually being evasive. So yes, Prabhupada gave us everything because he gave us everyone else, as my Guru Maharaj likes to say. Everything is in Prabhupada's books. Why? Yes, because in Prabhupada's books, he's pointing to so many other books also. So Srila Prabhupada is not a sectarian personality. He's coming to give us not only himself, but the gift of the whole parampara. He's not isolated in the chain of disciplic succession. So in his books, he's given us so many others, acharyas. He's recommending, read this book, read this other book. So yeah, in that sense, everything is there. So we should be mature in how we understand these terms. Sometimes devotees also say this idea of chant and be happy. That's all. Why the need of complicating your life that much? And yeah, but the point is, for many, it may not be working yet. I mean, so I would like to say between the chant and between the be happy, there is a big spacious parenthesis, some brackets, with so many things to consider in the context of chanting, so that chanting takes you to real happiness. But before expecting to be happy, because sometimes the idea of being happy may be, again, another form of evasiveness, trying to escape from certain things we need to solve, and we just want to be happy. Sometimes the be happy means I want to enjoy, basically. I want to be entertained. I want to exploit. So chant is not in that connection. Chant means try to, as Mahaprabhu starts saying, Chitudarpana Marjanam. Chitudarpana Marjanam means try to embrace your subconscious, basically. That's the beginning of chanting. And that may not sound too much happy. That may sound the opposite, but it's part of the real happiness project. So between chant and be happy, there are so many things to consider if we want to really chant and to really understand what's real happiness. So in the same way, to go to the Bhagavad Gita, so many things to consider. It's not enough just chant and be happy. Once my Guru Maharaj was giving a lecture, and he was trying to go into detail into so many aspects of our Siddhanta and Tattva and our philosophy. So at the end of the class, someone asked him, Maharaj, one question, what's the need of all these things you are speaking about, all these detailed explanations? Why to make it so complicated? Basically was the idea. The process is simple, chant and be happy. Why only just chant? Was basically the proposal of this person. So my Guru Maharaj looked at him and asked him, you tell me, are you only chanting and that's enough for you and you do not need to hear anything else, do anything else? Do you have that lifestyle? And the person, of course, says, no, no, it's not enough for me to chant. So he said, well, that's why I'm explaining all these other things, because we are not yet able to take full advantage from only chanting. Actually, chanting implies not only sitting and chanting, but leading a whole lifestyle that accompanies the chanting, that sets the proper ground and context. So when we sit to chant, everything else is in place, and we are not just totally dysfunctional and distracted with our mind running in 1,000 directions before we have not solved those things. So when we sit to chant, the last thing we are doing is chanting, actually. So that's my point. In the context of chanting in the best possible way, sometimes we may need to solve some other things that externally seem disconnected from the chanting, disconnected from the Bhagavad Gita, whatever. But actually, if we have the proper conception, the proper orientation, we will be doing those things in the service of that, in the context of becoming a more integrated, if you will, sadhaka. That's very, very important again. Because again, if not, there are so many, we can abuse so many quotes from Shastra. For example, the same person that tells me, Maharaj, why psychology, we have the Gita, I can quote Sukadeva Goswami saying, why a bed? There is grass. Why a pillow? You have an arm. This is a famous verse of Sukadeva Goswami. What's the need of running here and there for food? Are the trees not giving any longer fruits? Are the grass totally extinct? What the need of a bed? Of course, it's Sukadeva Goswami. But probably for most of us, that may be too much. And we may still need a bed and a pillow and go to the market. Or the same with Parikshit Maharaj, as we were speaking the other day in Janmashtami, when Sukadeva Goswami was testing him and telling, after just summarizing the whole Krishna Lila in 2 verses to create longing in the Raj, and say, maybe you can, according to Vishwanath Chakravarti, maybe you should rest now. Already 4 days have passed. You had no food, no drink, no rest. Maybe you can take a rest or maybe we can even finish here the whole session. So he was testing his disciple, and of course, Parikshit Maharaj said, no. because of hunger and thirst, is that I put a garlanded the sage with the snake and I got cursed. No, so now your kata is being my food, your kata is being my water, your kata is being my pran. So I that's sustaining me. I don't need to sleep, I don't need to eat, I don't need to drink. That was Parikshit Maharaj's standard. 1 week nirjal, if you will, but totally feeding himself, feasting on the Bhagavatam, if you will. But again, can we imitate that? Of course, we should follow in the footsteps. Anusara, which is different from Anukarana. Anukarana means imitation, which may end in a dysfunctional model. And Anusarana means follow the essence of that theme, which means being inspired with that, understanding which is the position of that person and which is my position, and only understanding the two positions, I can really draw realistic inspiration. Because if I just imitate something that is totally unsustainable, it's not really inspiring for me. Even though externally I may seem totally fired up, it will be a superficial thing. It's not really nourishing my faith, my process, my sharanagati. But if it's anusara, if I can really detect what's the standing of that person and contrast that, where is my standing, and what can I learn from that, what can I apply from that in my particular situation, oh, I can draw so much inspiration by becoming balanced, basically. That's it. That's the way of yoga. The Gita speaks about yoga from page 1 till the end. All the chapters, as you know, are about the type of yoga, if you will. Vishada yoga, Sankhya yoga, Karma yoga, Jnana yoga, Karma Sannyas yoga, Dhyana yoga, and so on. All the chapters are named after yoga. And in 6th chapter, which is the last one of the first 6, we deal with psychology. Krishna very nicely says, Yukta hara viharasya, Yukta chistasya, karmasu, Yukta swapna vabodasya, yogo bhavati dukkha. Very, very famous verse. When he says to Arjuna, the word yukta, as you may have heard many times, yukta ahara vihara asya, yukta chistasya karmasu, yukta sapna avabhodasya, yogo bhavati dukkha. If one is regulated in whatever one is doing, in recreation, in working, in sustaining one's life through some particular work, in sleeping, in the time one remains awake, basically in everything one does along one's life, if one is yukta means, basically balanced or authentic with one's own situation, yoga bhavati dukkha, one can really, eliminate all types of distress through the practice of yoga. So the point is to be balanced. So of course, with all these things I'm mentioning, there is place for modern psychology, a modern counseling in the life of a sadhaka, if that's really the necessity of the person. Of course, one can be distracted by that. That's also possible. No, let's not go to either both extremes, not to say that's Maya, literally, because not necessarily Maya, that's material that has nothing to do with the transcendence. That's not necessarily the case. Something is material as much as I do not see it in connection to the center, in connection to its source, as much as I do not contemplate reality with the lens of Sambandha Gyan, as much as I do not have Shastra Chakshu or scriptural eye to see reality and how everything is potential paraphernalia to be engaged in the service of Bhagavan. As much as I do not do that, that much whatever I'm doing, seeing is material, is Maya. Maya basically means to see something as it is not, basically. To see something isolated from its real function, from its real connection with the center. So Sambandha means that knowledge that shows me how everything is in connection to the center. That's the very definition of Yukta Vairagya. Rupa Goswami mentions that. Anasaktasya vishaya yathartam upayunjata nirbandha Krishna sambandhi yuktam vairagyam uchyate. Which means proper renunciation doesn't mean to reject everything, but to see everything in connection to Krishna and to engage that appropriately. correspondingly. Of course, not everyone may need that. For example, there's a place for psychology being used in the context of upgrading our human situation so we can become a better sadhaka. But it doesn't mean that because there is a purpose for that, everyone has to do that, not necessarily. But at least you have to see how every single thing, everything that exists, basically, that it is allowed to exist, it does so because it has some connection with the center. So that should be our healthy obsession. How do I establish that connection? Because as long as I do not establish that connection, I'm in a dangerous position, basically. I'm out of context with reality. So there is a place that everything becomes part of the Bhakti project, that everything becomes part of the transcendental culture. Srila Jiva Goswami uses these terms, Swarup Siddha Bhakti, Sangha Siddha Bhakti. Of course, all other terms as well are Arup Siddha Bhakti, but in this case, I concentrate in these two. Swarup Siddha Bhakti means those activities which are inherently Bhakti, like Kirtan, Sadhu Sangha, Shravan, and so on. So you do them and they are directly, intrinsically Bhakti. And there are other activities which are not inherently Bhakti, like going to the psychologist, having a shower, preparing lunch. It's not Bhakti in itself, but it can be Bhakti. It has the potential to become part of the Bhakti project, and that's called Sangha Siddha Bhakti. It has the potential of attaining perfection by being connected with Bhakti. But make that part of your Bhakti project. And again, being a Bhakta means being a sadhaka. Before being a siddha, I need to be a sadhaka. And to be a sadhaka has to do with dealing with my humanity in the context of attaining divinity. Because our ultimate goal of life is divine humanism, Brahma Lila, and Braja Lila, sorry. Krishna is Nara Lila, human-like. Everyone there is human-like. So there's a place for humanity in eternity. So we are not to dismiss our humanity. So we need to attend our humanity with all the necessities that our humanity may have in the present moment. But again, with our eyes in the ultimate goal, in that service. So again, in other words, there is place for that. And I will say also that, again, going back to the idea of using absolutistic terms like everything is in the Gita, everything is in Prabhupada's books, chant and be happy, and so on. Everything is in Shastra, you don't need to read any other book, and so on. That's, in one sense, it's true. Everything is in Shastra, but in other sense, it's not true. In the sense that Shastra may describe some things in a general way on certain level, but some things may not be described because they pertain to certain modern phenomena that was not happening on the social dynamics 5,000 years ago. No, you won't find in the Rig Veda a description of how to deal with social media, basically. You may find some general principles of how to deal with matter, with Maya Shakti, in such a way not to be overwhelmed. And in that sense, we can say, yeah, that they are speaking about that in that sense, in a general way, but in a detailed way, regarding the specifics of each case and situation, that won't be there because it's not part of the particular situation where that revelation took place. So there is a need for ongoing revelation, ongoing extension of the eternal ancient principles of Shastra, how those ancient and eternal principles play out in modernity regarding whatever, gender issues, homosexuality, drug abuse, different types of psychological dysfunctionalities, dealing with technology and social, so many things that in one sense, they are not described in detail in Shastra. But parampara means the present members of the lineage have to keep upgrading, updating, not only developing the Siddhanta, but also knowing how to address modern day issues in that particular connection. So when we speak about psychology, that's the case. There are different types of psychology. Of course, in general ways, it has to do with mind control, and so on. But different nuances of psychology are there for sure in different chapters and ages. So there is a need to address that in further detail. So there is a place for that in the life of a sadhaka, in the life of a sadhaka. So there's place for that, and and if it's enough for you to go into the Gita, that's great. But again, be very careful not to impose your particular situation onto others, because that's not actually the Gita, basically. So some ideas regarding, we could continue, of course, but I already spoke quite a lot with this first one, so I don't want to overextend. There are some other questions. So let's continue with the question by Namarasa. It says, in a time when the world is so divided, how do we as devotees stay united? That's his question. So this is a nice question, of course. And that should be a healthy concern for sure, because sometimes devotees may want to concentrate on saving the world, if you will. The world is so divided, the world is so much like this, we have to do this and we have to do that, but they are not thinking about how we can, that's the point, yeah, but how we can get united as devotees first. I've seen that a lot. No? Devotees speaking in terms of saving the world, but that actually, I'm not against that in one point, but the point is, strictly speaking, it's higher to save yourself, basically. Because in one sense, even the world, you cannot save the world, basically. If you want to save the world, it means you don't understand the dynamics of the Shrishti Lila, which will be here forever. With this, I'm not saying no need to be compassionate and so on. But sometimes the idea of messianic idea, I want to save the world to begin with. I mean, who are you to save the world? First be saved yourself, and then you may do something for the rest. But the point is, sometimes when the devotees, not all, but sometimes, many times, the devotees speak about preaching and making devotees and saving the world, if you will, making the world Krishna conscious. In many cases, that's more of an evasive, maybe subconscious, but an evasive tendency of trying to save others, but not dealing with their own case, or by not dealing with their own, as you mentioned, community, not dealing with the division that is in their, I don't know, mission or parivar or sampradaya. So if there is still considerable division among Gaudiya Vaishnavas, I would say it's interesting to try to heal that on some level at least, before we try to end up with all division in the rest of the world. Because if you go to the rest of the world with a message of unity, they will investigate a little bit and say, but you are a Gaudiya Vaishnava, right? Yes. Oh, but your lineage is a mess. So you are not walking the talk, Prabhu. So first you have to do your homework on some level at least. Again, the question should be how much I am doing my homework as much as I can. I may do my homework as much as I can, and I may not change the whole Gaudiya Sampradaya for sure. But at least if you really are trying to do your homework as much as you can in trying to bring further unity among the Gaudiya community, that will naturally have some further impact in your other unity attempts outside of the Gaudiya circle. So I would say to have that clear, it will be a great beginning. I may stop my reply here. I would say something else, but I'm tempted to stop my reply here in the sense of making that point. Like before speaking about so many other things we can do, why not consider this particular situation, this particular idea? And of course, there are so many levels of that. Yesterday, I was speaking with one disciple of Bhakti Charu Swami who came here and visited us and came to also greet me, and we were speaking about some time. It was a nice talk, and he's really engaged into trying to bring some further unity among the Gaudiya Vaishnavas beyond his own mission, and I appreciated that. And of course, he mentioned to me also, yes, it will be nice to bring more unity into the line of Sarasvat Gaudiya Vaishnavas. And I thought that's great, but also it's great eventually to understand the Gaudiya Vaishnavas are not only those who come from the lineage of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, no? Because sometimes we may also, like, of course, when we need to change something, we may have to limit our focus and work on that and gradually expand. Okay, Saraswati lineage, Bhaktivinoda Parivar, Gaudiya Sampradaya, the world, if you will, something like this. But yeah, that's also an important point to have in mind, because sometimes in the name of creating certain unity, we may be subtly, I'm not saying he was doing that, but sometimes we may think, yeah, we have to create unity in the Saraswati lineage. And if someone says, but what about the other Gaudiya circle? Oh no, all of them are Sahajas. And maybe that's not very generous, basically, because that's not necessarily true. You may be more Sahaja in some way than many other Vaishnavas in other circles. There are so many ways of being Sahajas, we spoke many times. So I would say that to stay united as devotees, basically the question includes the answer. You know, we are devotees. I mean, we try on some level. So what makes ourselves devotees? What makes us being part of that particular denomination, devotees? There is something in common there. There are some common goals, common ideals. So how much we are able to remain focused on that and not being distracted by the particularities of each individual mission, mood, and culture, and how do they sing kirtan, how do they recite the shlokas, how they conduct their mission. All this type of relative aspects sometimes become so absolute for us that we lose total sight of who the person is actually, and how much we have in common, and how much we are part of one big family, because that's what the Vedas say, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which basically means there is only one family. If you start to think in terms of more than one family, you start to promote sectarianism, basically. So yeah, I will again try to pound the post of my first point, because we as Gaudiyas have such a high philosophy, such a developed theology, such a refined theistic conception, so sweet, this detailed descriptions of post-liberated status. I mean, unparalleled contribution by Mahaprabhu and his followers, so high. But the point is, sometimes such a high thing, you become totally, like, I will say, obscured by really immature and fanatical behaviors in the name of representing such high things. So there's nothing more unbecoming than that. At least for me, there's no more higher udipana for Vivatsa Rasa. Hopefully you follow my point. It's such a thing. In other words, there's no higher stimulant for the experience of disgust that having someone representing the most refined ideal in the most dysfunctional way. You follow? From lip service, from mouth out, you are speaking some high things, but in practice, we may be walking in the street, and if you see someone coming that is from another mission, you cross to the other side of the street, or you look to another part. So if you haven't seen I'm not saying everyone is doing that for sure, and of course I have hope that there's the possibility of change, because I mean, if not, what we are doing here. So, but yes, still that situation is there. So I will really emphasize about this necessity to get united as Gaudiyas in our identity as Gaudiyas, as being part, in getting together in that sense. I mean, we will still belong to different missions, institutions, and modes, and gurus, and lineages, and all the things, but there's some unity in that diversity. If we are not able to establish the unity in the diversity, there will only remain diversity. And if there's only diversity, means there will be only conflict, division, duality. All the things that we are supposed to transcend in our practice, we may be promoting them through our practice, quote unquote practice. Sometimes in the name of practicing spiritual life, that practicing spiritual life may be the best excuse not to practice spiritual life. So it's important, so important to establish some underlying unity, underlying proper understanding of the universality, for example, of Guru Tattva. That has to do with this idea. No? Stop thinking in terms of my guru, your guru. Of course, there is my guru, your guru on one level, but on a more foundational level, there is a guru is only one. Guru Tattva is a principle, it's a tattva, it's a department, it's a metaphysical, ontological reality that expresses itself through so many representatives, but at the same time, there is this unified aspect of that. So we should bear in mind the two of them, unity and diversity, unity and diversity. So this is not just words, but of course we need to think about this type of words as well. We need to really ruminate on them and play them out in our relationships with other Vaishnavas. And again, maybe with this, I'm not saying immediately go and try to develop deeper links with all the Gaudiya mats or something, because for sure, to begin with, you may have some things to harmonize in your own community, in your own mission, with your own God siblings. So let's start home, and from there gradually expand and expand and expand. So, but we have to show some concern for that, basically. So the common ideal that's the whole idea of community. Communities, we are united, common unity. We are united with a common goal. And that common ideal is so powerful, so harmonizing, so beautiful that it can accommodate everything and everyone. That's the house in which the whole world can live that Prabhupada mentioned. He has constructed. But we should live in that house without jumping to each other's necks, basically, but in harmony and at least trying to develop that. Okay, some thoughts. I will say, I can say many other things, but I will prefer to focus on that particular point. Sakirati and Devi and Shyamnanda has some question. You raise your hand.
Yes, Dandavat Pranam to you,
Yes.
all the devotees. I have a question that it's kind of related with what you just said, answering the two questions. And it's like, I notice, and it's my personal opinion, that like amongst devotees, there is a kind of gap in the progress we do. Like, for example, Shintoist temples, which are also based on Veda, and the teachings are very similar. In Shintoist temples, like,
can you repeat, because the streaming was stopped for a second?
Okay, I was saying that, like, for example, in Shintoism, in their temples, like, there are at least, in most of them, there are kind of 1,000 steps to walk to reach the temple, to understand how much effort you have to put in it, and to prepare also your mind and your body into that. They have a very strict sadhana. Also, Buddhist monks, they really start like a very strong sadhana. They learn to know their bodies, to identify themselves. But with the devotees, I feel like there is not this background that there is in Asia, where their Vedic teachings are there since like in the society. But in the Western world, like everything starts mainly after Prabhupada came. So there is a Western background. And I feel like there is a kind of gap, like from, for example, from elementary school, we step already to university level without really go through all the phases, like learn who we really are, learn how to identify ourselves in bhakti and how to practice and what is really sadhana. And how to move into bhakti. So I would like to know your thoughts about it and if there is some kind of solution.
The streaming was quite interrupted. I think I got the gist of your question. I think it's most my connection than yours, but what to do? I'm in India. But I think I got the idea. So I'll try to reply something and you let me know if I skipped some important part. So yeah, I will say that of course it's nice to look at other traditions and to be inspired by them. But also it may be a tricky thing in the sense of sometimes, of course, it may be almost unavoidable for most of us to compare. And in the comparison, generally, our mind works like, this is better than this. I'm not saying you are working like that, but generally that can happen. So you may go to some, whatever, as you mentioned, Buddhist monastery in Tibet, let's say, and you will see, okay, they are so strict doing this and that, or you go to some, I don't know, very intense Catholic also monasteries, Christian monasteries, and you will read, oh my God, they are so intense in this and that, and Gaudiyas are not like that. So one may think, why we're not like that? And of course, they may visit us and think differently. We are not like them. Why we are not like them? And everyone may be thinking something similar from a different place. And of course, the whole idea is not that anyone is, the idea is that nobody feels disturbed by that comparison, if you will, but actually appreciate there are different lineages, different sadhanas, and different sadhyas, different goals. So there are different ways of approaching the goal, different emphasis. For example, in many traditions, such as some of the ones you mentioned, there's quite a lot of emphasis in vairagya, in detachment, renunciation, in austerity. And in bhakti, there may not be that emphasis, at least on that degree. And of course, why that is so? Because bhakti, according to us, is the most powerful thing, the most powerful Shakti, if you will. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, by invoking bhakti into our lives, there's not the need to engage in certain things that without bhakti, you may need to attain your particular goal, which may not be too related to bhakti either, but which may need some bhakti at least, as we know, for it to bear its fruit. Mm-hmm. So that's also an important point. But of course, that idea can also be abused, because we can say, no, I'm practicing bhakti. So bhakti is so powerful that I don't need to do anything else. I don't need to make any sacrifice, to make any efforts. Sometimes we may say, I don't need to do any tapasya and vairagya, but actually what we are saying is, I don't want to do any sacrifice or effort. In other words, you're saying, I'm lazy. You are not saying that. You're just saying, bhakti is so powerful. It seems you have so much faith in bhakti, but actually one is just being evasive in the name of glorifying bhakti. And that's of course not the idea, because as our Guru Master emphasizes also, yeah, there is a lot of mercy in the process. For example, we speak a lot about kripa, but again, it doesn't mean that we don't have to do anything. There is a lot of effort implied in our project in order to really appreciate the kripa, basically. As I like to say, if you want to live your life by sustaining on costless grace, that's the most difficult thing to do, because it means you have to acknowledge that you are receiving something that you will never deserve, no matter what you do. So that requires lots of effort to remain humble, to deal with something that for eternity you will never deserve. So if you really properly understand, there is some particular effort. Again, I'm not saying everyone is doing that, because as with every tradition, most of its practitioners may not be really quite engaged. Even you may speak about Buddhism. It's not that most of the Buddhists are monastics living in the mountain. You can see so many Western Buddhists, quote unquote, that mainly take Buddhism as a device, as a tool. Okay, I will do my mindfulness now. And they identify, yes, I'm Buddhist, but they kind of resort to that to calm their mind a little bit. Or Christian people that will just go to church on Sunday, so they pray to God for whatever they need. Krishna says the same in the Gita, Artha Jignasur, Artha Tigyani Chabaratarshava. Most people will approach me with certain personal desires of wealth and so on, karma kanda say. So the point is, most of the people, as my Guru Maharaj will say, may be religious, but the mystics are the few ones. So it's not that our path is not promoting that, but it may be only that we don't want to be those type of people. Because the point is, what is like impeding is in English? What is not allowing me to be a mystic? I mean, if I want, I can do that. I mean, if I even would like to be a mystic in the Avadhuta model and go to the cave and whatever, of course, I wouldn't say that you can choose to be an Avadhuta. I mean, Avadhuta is someone like, it's not like, okay, I will be an Avadhuta. I mean, Avadhuta means you are crazy in love for God and you behave in total particular way. So you cannot just press a button and enter there. But my point is, if someone would like to have a particular mystic approach to one's tradition, there's nothing that will be an impediment to that. But the point is, we may not want that. So that's an important aspect. But, and of course, as we know, in Gaudiya Vedanta, there's not that much emphasis into vairagya, jnana, austerity, because jnana, karma, dhyana, abhritam, that can somehow cover, if you will, one's bhakti project and even make the heart harder. So we want to melt our heart, and for us, bhakti is the greatest priority in that connection. Again, we are to learn from other traditions, and actually, if we pay proper attention to what Shastra says and to the life of the saints, if you pay attention to the life of the Goswamis, who are our role model, I mean, you have all those things in one way or another, maybe not in the particular format you find in Shintoism or Buddhism, but in the Gaudiya format, there is, I mean, thousands of dandavats per day, chanting certain number of rounds, a certain level of humility and self-discipline, and so much austerity, but coming as a byproduct of bhakti, which is another thing. So again, we are to follow the Goswamis as much as we can. Again, we are not to imitate them, but they are our role model. But the point again is how much I'm willing to follow the Goswamis. So again, this is a question we have to ask ourselves on a daily basis without paranoia, but remaining realistic and objective and not getting discouraged like nobody else in Gaudiya Vedanta is doing what the Goswamis are doing. And the question, of course, immediately will the wind will ask you back, and what about you? No? And you will have to say, well, and we don't want to play victim consciousness. No, sometimes we want the whole world to be an ideal example, and only then I will join, something like that. So call me when everyone became a Mahabhagavat, so I joined the party or something. But it doesn't work like that. And for sure, if we have that sincere desire, of course, we may need the contact of at least one of those great personalities. One may be more than enough. But again, the question is what I'm doing with that one, how much commitment I am investing in that connection, how much I'm giving myself in that connection. Again, not to get discouraged, just to be objective, sincere, and see where I am, see where I should be, or I could be eventually to reach that platform, and so on. So it's like that. Because again, if not, it can be distracting also. No? If in certain stages we look too much at other traditions, that can be also distracting. So there is a way for, in the beginning, we may have to be more exclusive, if you will, more sectarian. There's place for that in being a Kanishta Bhakta. You need to focus on, this is the teaching. Like Prabhupada would say, I put a fence around you, do not look anyone else. Pay attention now here. And eventually when you grow, you will realize, oh, there are some other things, but you have some grounding that will allow you not to be disturbed, not to be distracted, but how others are doing their things, but to draw inspiration from that and nourish your own faith in your path, which is a whole art. It's not so easy. To go to a Buddhist temple, I'll increase your Gaudiya Shraddha, if you will. That should be the idea. It's not that you go to temple and start to wonder, maybe I should become a Buddhist and leave my Gurudev. And no, it doesn't work like this. But eventually, when you even become above this Madhyam stage where you are able to integrate and learn from anywhere, you will again become more sectarian in a transcendental way, I will say. You will become more totally absorbed and identify with your own path. Not criticizing any others, but not having time at that point to deal with other processes and learn from that. You will be learning too much from what is already coming from your own process. So we should know where we are in that particular ladder and act accordingly. I don't know if that helps and if I heard part of your question or something, but I hope something is useful there. Okay, we have some few minutes. I will go to the second question made by Balaram Prabhu, and then I see I have some others in the chat. So maybe I may reply them a little bit quicker now. So the second question from Balaram is, following on from last week's discussion, how do we know when a preaching strategy has reached its shelf life and should be given up? And will it be better not to use such strategies, knowing that future generations might misunderstand them? Well, we spoke about that a little bit these last days. Of course, I know that's a pretty traumatic term for some. I'm considering adjusting that and using some other words like outreach technique or circumstantial adjustment or whatever. And by the way, I'm also like honing my own stance regarding what I mentioned concerning why I think that acharyas like Bhaktivinoda Thakur and others at times may have seemed to say that bhakti is inherent or not. Not, of course, to the point of thinking that bhakti is inherent, but really trying to consider more nuanced possibilities regarding the background of their words at that time. But of course, that said, still we know that there has been in the past, in our Gaudiya history and beyond that, what we may call preaching strategies or outreach techniques. No? For example, when we spoke about Srila Prabhupada mentioning that we fall from Golok Vrindavan at times, I mean, some may not agree with that, but for me, that's a particular technique. I mean, that's a circumstantial adjustment. He said that in a particular situation to a particular audience. So, and again, that's not to be, we are not downplaying him for saying that, because as I mentioned the other day, some devotees will feel, if you if you like, what's the word? Suggest that some of our acharyas may have presented that, you are totally downplaying him, but that's not how it works. Because for presenting a teaching scheme or device, you have to have some also compassion and genius and so many qualities. So there's place for doing that in the context of glorifying that person. So how do we know when that preaching strategy reached the shelf life? Of course, it will depend in each particular case, because what you are saying to whom, and what's like the example I gave of the mother speaking to her child, and telling a stork brought you through the chimney. So there's a shelf life for that, and the shelf life may last till, I don't know, whenever the child is in time to know about the particular dynamics of sexual intercourse and how pregnancy is coming through that and so on. There's a particular moment that generally we can start to speak about that to children. So that's an example of knowing when. So similarly, I don't know, a guru may be telling to one disciple something, a particular stage, but also following the case in a personal way closely, and thus seeing the disciple's progress and how he or she is processing the understanding and knowing when to present a more refined version of that. No? Again, it's not some universal law. It should stop here, because every outreach technique will be different. Different things will be said, adjusted in particular terms, moments to different people. It's so individual, so specific. So that's one part of the question. And then it says, will it be better not to use such strategies knowing that future generation might misunderstand them? Yeah, there's a place for that. I actually also mentioned that idea. At one point I say that I feel that the preaching strategy for nowadays is no more preaching strategy. In the sense of course, with this I'm not saying, I'm not saying no preaching strategies in every single way, because in some very specific situation, in some whatever country and circumstance, one particular sadhu is with a particular person, may need to adjust something for a particular moment, and it's not that I'm forbidding that. But yeah, at least with some of these things that, for example, fall from Golok, that at some time, at least personally, I know that not everyone will agree with that, but I know that many will. Prabhupada say that in the context of preaching strategy, because he very clearly say nobody fall from Vaikuntha, but he said otherwise as well, and the two kind of go together in this case. So, I mean, I think that particular, for example, outreach technique already has expired. His shell life has expired, in the sense of all the devotees are new generations of devotees are coming, knowing, hearing from other sadhus. Social media these days, there are so much knowledge is available now, so many other more books translated, explaining in further detail this particular tattva, which is a very different situation than the one that Srila Prabhupada was in more than 50 years back, basically, or approx. Dealing with an audience that never heard with about Gaudiya Vedanta, were not in connection with other Gaudiyas, and we're having certain particular, some scar from their own tradition, culture, psychology. So again, in 50 years, so many things happen, especially nowadays that time goes so quick. In 50 years of now, more things happen than in 3 centuries, 1 century back or something. So yes, in that sense, I will suggest that in terms of those type of devices that have been invoked some decades back, like the one I mentioned and some others maybe, it's a good moment for trying to emphasize in the Gaudiya community the knowing of Siddhanta. And of course, before emphasizing the knowing of Siddhanta, we have to know the Siddhanta. Because some devotees don't know the Siddhanta. And some leaders do not know the Siddhanta, unfortunately. I was speaking with one devotee recently. He told me, Maharaj, nice that you are a young sannyasi and you are really trying to learn Shastra and so on. I'm not that young and I'm not that learned. And I'm not that sannyasi, but well, I'm trying to do my best. Or maybe I'm not even trying to do my best. I have to be realistic, so hopefully I may try. But he was telling me, unfortunately, in my particular group, many of the sannyasis or even gurus are not very much like drenched in Shastra. So of course I thought, yeah, that's unfortunate, because if you are occupying a particular position like being a guru or a sannyasi, your main focus should be achar and prachar, basically to have a proper conduct. That means to be properly absorbed in sadhana, and prachar means to be engaged in study, because you have to know what to do. You have to preach on the basis of scripture. You have to foster Shastriya Shraddha in your audience. And that implies you will get to know the Siddhanta. Maybe you will get to know some other things on the way that that do not fit with Siddhanta. So you need to exercise your capacity, your logic, and your so many things to accommodate that. No, this is connected with another question here I see from Anil. He says, how to reconcile contradictory statements and outrageous statements made by acharyas. So that's a little bit in connection. That's why I mentioned this question now. Of course, there are different things that acharyas say. By outrageous, I will need some particular example, because there are so many things and we need to understand all of them in their unique particular context. We cannot just like generalize and put them out of context. For example, Srila Prabhupada say some strong things about his god brothers. But also he says so many beautiful things about his god brothers. You know, once one devotee sent me a link with all the things that Prabhupada, a compilation of the letters that Prabhupada spoke strongly about his god brothers, criticizing them. And it was really strong. But then he sent me another link when he spoke very beautiful things about his god brothers, and it was really strongly beautiful. So the point is, you have to put the two things in the scale. It's not just cherry picking the one that you like the most to make your case, because I think Namrasa recently said that some devotees, they will just look for that particular letter that will just justify their particular point, and that's all. But that's not how we are trying to define Siddhanta. You have to engage in sangati, or reconciliation of apparently opposing statements and so on. It's not just cherry picking. So I will say, basically, to begin with, we have to have that disposition to harmonize. And of course, we need certain guidance, certain maturity to engage in that. Not everyone has the duty or the capacity to do that, but there is the need to do that. At least we should begin feeling the need of doing that. So after that, yes, we have to first of all know what's the Siddhanta, as established by our Shastra Gurus, the founding Acharya of the Gaudiya Sampradaya, the 6 Goswamis. We have to have that to put everything else in context. So whatever other Acharyas have said that may not fit what the original revelation of the Gaudiya Sampradaya revealed, that's to be seen in a particular light, whatever may be that light. I cannot tell you because I'm speaking in a general way. But first we have to establish some common canon, canonical, scriptural authority, praman, what we call, in order to have a dialogue on what has been said after that, how to understand, how to reconcile. Sometimes devotees are not very willing to do this exercise, so that will only end in some struggle in social media, basically, and some shouting to each other, and that's totally like irrelevant. Basically, it's not making any substantial contribution to our lives, to the Gaudiya Sampradaya, and so on. So we need to take the time, and this is a tapasya. This is a real tapasya. This takes energy, this takes thinking, this takes humility, this takes so many things to invest, to take the time and energy to investigate and research and harmonize and honor and not disrespect anyone, and and maybe even reaching some points where you are not able to fully grasp some things, and you have to just resort to prayer, and hopefully Krishna will reveal, and that shouldn't disturb your faith at the same time. I mean, there may be some complex chapters of the puzzle. Again, for that we also need the shelter and association of higher advanced Vaishnavas that we can also take shelter in and find some rapport in those connections. So things like this. I hope that helps, Anil. Again, it was a general reply because the question was general without the specific cases. If not, we can go more specifically. So there's one more question, so I will finish with this one from Madan Mohan Prabhu. It's in Spanish, so I will read it in English. I hope you speak English as well, because it's in English, as you can see. He says, how to transcend or be purified from the tendency to philosophical speculation, Gyan Mishra Bhakti, and surrender oneself to Krishna with a simple heart, only with the desire of serving him and pleasing him, and without trying to understand everything with the intellect. I'm asking this because I have that tendency very much strongly present in me. Okay, you are not alone in the club, Madan Mohan. So to begin with, do not feel isolated. And I will say that going back to my first answer, we have to be careful of not being simplistic and reductionistic here, and trying to, in the name of having a simple heart, stop in thinking. Because yeah, we speak about Gyan Mishra Bhakti, and we hear the goal is Gyan Sunya Bhakti, Gyan Prayasamadapasyanam Antariva, so on. But this is not just like, again, pressing a button and we are there. We actually need to engage. That's the real challenge. If you have an intellectual tendency, let's say, you're speaking about surrendering to Krishna. But surrendering with Krishna with a simple heart means actually surrendering all our functions before we surrender our heart, I will say, in one sense. Of course, in one sense, it begins in the heart. No? The heart is touched by the sadhu, something happens there, and we want to give ourselves. But when we say, okay, I will want to give myself, you then start to realize, okay, how do I do that in practice? You try to engage your senses and mind and intellect in the context of giving pleasure to Krishna. That's the very definition of sadhana bhakti. We are sadhakas. We are supposed to engage in sadhana. And sadhana is krita sadhya bhabhe sadhya bhavasa sadhana vida. Nitya siddhasya bhavasya prakatyam hridi sadhyata. The very definition of sadhana bhakti means to engage your senses, and by extension senses mean also mind, intellect, in a favorable way for the pleasure of the Lord of the senses. Krishikena Hrishikesh Sivanam Bhakti Ruchate. So we are not to be evasive in the name of intellect. I mean, we have an intellect, we have to do something with that. It's not just kill your head, basically. Stop thinking, become numb, and just love Krishna from the heart. That may be just a sentimental proposal. Of course, if you are not too intellectual, you don't need to force yourself to be intellectual, because it's not that being intellectual is represent higher adhikaran bhakti. It has nothing to do with that. Higher adhikaran bhakti basically has to do with engaging surrendering my nature, whatever that may be, in a tasteful way for the pleasure of my Istadev. So if you have an intellectual nature, surrender your intellect to Bhagavan. If you have a not so intellectual nature, surrender that not so intellectual part for the pleasure of Bhagavan. I mean, so that's how the intellect and the mind gradually will become captured, basically, by being engaged in bhakti, and therefore acquiring bhakti samskars and purifying each one of these different aspects of our gross and subtle bodies. It's not about neglecting them, but it's about engaging them. So transcending the tendency for philosophical speculation basically means knowing the Siddhanta. But actually, you compare philosophical speculation with Gyan Mishra Bhakti. In one level it can be connected, in one level it can be something different. It's not necessarily the same thing. Because philosophical speculation may be basically, I'm just trying to understand things from my head. And Gyan Mishra Bhakti may be, I'm practicing bhakti, but still I have some tendency to, I don't know, to nourish my intellect with something that is not bhakti. Or I'm not fully in the platform of seeing Krishna not as God. So still there is some gyan mixed there. I have the Bhagavad Gyan. I am aware that Krishna is God. That's also a form of Gyan Mishra Bhakti. Gyan Sunya Bhakti is there is no Gyan whatsoever in my Bhakti, not even the Gyan, the knowledge that Krishna is God. That's a Brajavasis standard, if you will. Brain dead Bhakti, as Srila Sridhar Maharaj will call. Brain dead Bhakti. And my Guru Maharaj, in this connection, he always likes to quote, since we invoked Srila Sridhar Maharaj, his successor, Sripad Bhakti Sundar Govinda Maharaj, who once said, he was given a whole lecture about the necessity of this Gyan Sunya Bhakti and the importance of the heart above the head, and not getting entangled in one's own intellect. But in the context of presenting his point, he was quoting one verse after another from Shastra. He was invoking Shastra constantly. So he was showing a super V standard of knowledge and using his intellect, but in the context of revelation, with the purpose of this conclusion, Gyan Sunya Bhakti. So my Guru Maharaj will say in those terms, no? Try to use your head, but to soften your heart. But do not try to soften your heart without using your head. That may end up in sentimentalism. So surrender to Krishna means, again, engaging your functions for his pleasure. And as I mentioned before, to reach simple heart, sometimes we first have to integrate some complexity. And sometimes intellect has to do with that. So it's important to learn how to integrate complexity, how to deal with all those things, and learning to engage everything in the context of bhakti. And gradually, we will become simple, not simplistic. Be careful with being simplistic. Try to become more and more simple. So it's not so easy. Again, the goal is to, only have the desire to serve and please Krishna. I mean, sometimes the devotees may get discouraged because they realize I do not have that desire and I should have that desire, but probably you shouldn't have that desire at this present stage, because that type of desire corresponds with the higher stage that you are not in now. So if you are in an Artha Nibrita and Bhajana Kriya, probably you shouldn't just force yourself, I should be feeling only to please Krishna without a hint of selfishness. That won't happen in that stage. Of course, you should understand that's the goal to attain, and I want to walk in that direction. But I cannot just expect that to happen in my present chapter, and I shouldn't get discouraged because that's not happening in my present chapter. I should be intelligent enough, use my intelligence to understand the symptoms of each step of the ladder and understand when that will happen. And in that case, cry when that will happen. Kavi have, when, oh when, oh when. Basically. And of course, one last thing will be, of course, trying to work under the guidance of Sri Guru and the Vaishnava in proximity, in close manner, because that's also a very important way to let our intellect be harnessed and be engaged in seva also. Not only that's something that helps a lot people who has lots of intellectual tendency also, to stop for a minute and to engage in some simple menial services for the pleasure of the Vaishnavas. That's a good way of grounding, if you will, ourselves in reality, and not getting too much like flying in the sky with our intellect. Even if we may be engaging that in seva, but sometimes we need a rest from that. And I can tell you, I know what that means. I need that on a daily basis. So it's important to balance all the things that we should be introspective about, knowing our own limits and our own necessities, which is my capacity, when I should put pause in my intellect, when I should engage on a more even, if you will, physical growth level in seva, where I should recreate, as we mentioned before, one should be regulated in recreation in this and that and that. And what's recreation for me is not maybe recreation for you. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur said recreation for a yogi is wake up from the cave and go for a walk and return to the cave. So that may not be enough recreation for most of us. No? Recreation, I will walk 2 blocks, return. That was my weekly recreation. No? So everyone has to really know how to do all the things in a balanced way, and that requires observation, sincerity, introspection. So some ideas. I hope that helps. And we are almost reaching an hour and a half, so I think we have a good amount of questions today on different topics. So I appreciate the presence of all of you and your contribution in the form of different inquiries. So thank you so much, and I hope to see you all next week. For sure, I wish you a very ecstatic, happy Shri Radhastami next Monday as well, and hope to see you soon. Srila Gurudev ki jai, Sriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Shri Jagannath Baladev Srivadri ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Praman Hari Hari Bo Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.